And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Tuesday, May 15th. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain, and many of the stories we read here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com, and here are some of those stories. Season 1 of Canada's Got Talent was won by Sagints Finest, a trio of traditional Native dancers from Fort Alexander, Manitoba. Executive producer John Bruton has always touted the cultural diversity of this show, with almost 12,000 Canadians auditioned from across the country, and how distinct it was from its American cousin. So who better to win the premier season than three teams from a Manitoba reservation about 120 kilometers north of Winnipeg, who introduced many of us to clogging. How Canadian is that, they say. Brothers Dallas and Brandon Cusheen and friend Vincent Olaney won $100,000, a spot in City TV's New Year's Eve show, a chance to perform in Las Vegas, a trip to Tobago, and a Nissan GTR, worth about another $100,000 as well. Vincent is the only one with a driver's license, that lucky guy. Sagins Finest, whose name comes from the Sagkeeng First Nation, were the only finalists from Manitoba in a pool of mostly big city competitors, and the charisma of Sagins Finest touched people across the country, and here they are. Artist Tony Abeda just can't help himself, pushing up his sleeves and letting his fingers make one more run through his deliberately tousled hair. He reaches for a bit of charcoal on his studio table and goes at the three finished canvases again. In minutes, his fingertips are black, his forearms are smudged, and there's one more layer on the Tri-Tech, which he has dubbed Divine Intervention, just in time for the curators to pick it up. The work will be hanging in the entry of the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture as part of the annual Native Treasures Indian Arts Festival, which opens in Sante Fe on May 25th, with Abeta being recognized as this year's living treasure. Abeta says it's a little strange to think of himself as a living treasure at age 46, but festival organizers say the reasons were clear: his style, his time spent mentoring other young Native American artists, and his refusal to fall back on formulas when it comes to creating art. Abeta is among the artists who are pushing the envelope when it comes to redefining American Indian art. And today we go to Alaska Public Radio News Director Lori Townsend for a conversation and update on some Alaska Native news. Lori Townsend, thanks for joining with us today from Anchorage, Alaska. Give us a little idea what kind of news is going on up that way with the Native population.
Hi, Paul. It's a beautiful spring day here in Anchorage, and there's a lot of news. You may remember that the former head of the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission, Maggie Amalwak, was indicted on some charges of misappropriation of funds She has pleaded guilty now to 2 counts of misapplication of about $475,000 in commission money. She'll be sentenced in July. Not sure what that will involve, but she was the head of the commission from 1990 to 2007, and her husband, George Amawak Sr., was a 5-time mayor of the borough. Then he was out of that position for a couple of terms when Mayor Edward Itta was in the position. And Mr. Amawak tried to run again, but Maggie, his wife, was indicted just about a week or two before the elections, and he didn't. It was a very close race, but he did not prevail. He didn't prevail.
Yeah.
So
Sorry to hear that.
we're waiting to hear what happens with that sentencing.
Okay. And you said there were some events over on the St. Lawrence Island, the same thing, some criminal activity of some kind. Tell us about that.
Yes, 10 men from St. Lawrence Island, from the community of Savunga, were cited for selling raw ivory and polar bear hides, which is illegal under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Things that are sold have to be worked. They have to be considered some sort of artwork or handicraft. So they've got to be scrimshawed or some kind of workings on them. The skins have to be sewn. So they've been cited.
Where were they selling this? Just to anyone? They weren't going to a foreign country or something like that, or?
No, this is, they were working with some people that were actually in the south central part of the state here in Glen Allen area that were buying and selling, and they were, getting cigarettes, booze, guns, snow machines, all different kinds of things for these hides and ivory. But they've all been cited now. Undercover agents seized about 1,000 pounds of ivory, and more than 150 were whole tusks. So they seized quite a bit, and also 2 polar bear hides and some guns and things were seized in that criminal activity.
What kind of tusks were they getting those from?
Those were walrus, I believe.
It sounds. I was
Yes.
thinking that's what it'd be
Walrus
walrus.
ivory.
So they're looking
Yeah.
for the ivory, and you need to carve them. You need to make them into some kind of artistic piece to cover them in terms of the handicraft laws and endangered species laws, in some cases.
Absolutely.
This a similar case. There were some people arrested for selling some kind of ivory having to do with an ancient mammoth or something as well.
Yes, an Alaska guide, actually, who's quite well known, wrote a book, The Alaska River Guide, and she was indicted for helping a client smuggle a 10,000-year-old mammoth fossil to Pennsylvania. And she helped him get that from, it was worth about $4,000. They took it from land in northwest Alaska in 2007, so this investigation's been going on for quite some time. But she's a fairly well-known guide, and there was a lot of people quite surprised that she would have engaged in this type of illegal activity, of course fully knowing that it was illegal to remove that piece of mammoth ivory. So there's been some illegal activity in the natural resources realm lately in Alaska.
Right. Well, let's talk about something that always interests me in the last 5 minutes that we have. Whaling. Of course, in the United States and the lower states, the biggest controversy over whaling came out of the macaw. But up in Alaska there, it seems like a pretty regular thing. And let's see, you eat that stuff called, starts with an M?
Muktuk. Yeah.
Muktuk. And what do you wash it down with?
Well, it
Orange
depends
goo?
on, it depends. There's a lot of different ways of eating muktuk. In fact, I have some what people call black muktuk in my freezer right now for a friend that I got from another friend in Barrow who had come through town and brought some bowhead muktuk, and they call that black muktuk, and then beluga muktuk is white muktuk. But the crews up north have had a good spring. 10 whales were taken by Barrow crews, and also, let's see, Gamble whalers and Savunga whalers, once again on St. Lawrence Island, were gathering whales, and 5 whales were taken by Barrow. I'm sorry, 10 whales total between the St. Lawrence Island and the Barrow cruise, and one.
Let me ask
One
this
nice.
question. Were you ever at a harvesting of a whale when they're cutting it up? But tell us a little bit about what they're looking for, what they're using for. Is everything?
Oh
Everything in there?
yes, yeah. It's amazing to see. I was in Barrow one year for spring whaling, and was invited into a whaling captain's home, and there were people cutting up meat. And so here's these enormous sections of meat and muktuk laid out, on clean surfaces in the kitchen. And there was about 6 women cutting meat there. And what they were doing at that time was making something called mikiak, which is meat and blood that's put into big containers. It's set out at a cool spot, like out on the outer porch, and stirred for a couple of weeks, and it sort of ferments. And then when they have a celebration on the beach where they bring in the boat off of the ice and say some prayers and for the successful hunt, and they bring the boat in, and then they have this little festival, this little Mikiak celebration where elders and community members are invited down, and they all share this food, this fermented food, and that's part of that ceremony that they have. But watching people cut up the meat is truly amazing because it's, of course, as you can imagine, tons and tons of meat and muktuk. So
You
it's
feed a
quite an event.
village. Feed a village where the food goes out into a communal way. People are getting pieces of it. People are using the oil.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. It's shared absolutely with the community. And the whaling captain, I believe, has the choice of certain parts of the more select pieces of the whale to either give or to keep. And they can make those decisions. And then the broader animal is shared with the community, and people, they do everything from boil it to dry it to freeze it. There's all different ways that it can be prepared and kept for the wintertime.
Wow, that sounds cool. You ever go out on a fishing boat? Have you had a chance to do that?
No, I have not been out. I was able to go out on the ice off of Barrow one year to a whale census camp about 5 miles out on the sea ice to see where they were counting whales, but haven't been around a whaling crew. I don't think it's really something that happens very often that people that aren't involved in a whaling crew would be around
Right.
those
Sounds
vessels.
dangerous and sounds like if you're going to be out there, you're going to be breaking your back working, doing what
Right.
needs to be done, and it's not as easy as some people might envision.
No, I can't imagine it myself going out in these skin boats that aren't very large and bringing in something that can weigh, 30 tons. It's just unbelievable that they
Uh,
can get
this
that whale, bring it in.
this meat gift that you got, do you boil it, fry it, eat it raw, eat it with relish? What do you?
Well, the
Can I
muktuk
come
that I
visit
was
you and eat some of that? Try
Of
some?
course, you should definitely do that. The muktuk that I was given was boiled, but oftentimes it's raw and just frozen, and then it's sliced very thin. And some people like to dip it in seal oil. Some people just eat it. I've only eaten it just the way it is. Just I've had raw and boiled muktuk, and they're both real quite good.
Where can we get more information on some of these stories you covered?
These stories, and actually some great stories that we're doing about climate change implications in villages on the North Slope, are just rolling out this week. Those are airing on Alaska News Nightly, and you can find all of those stories at alaskapublic.org.
Thanks for joining with us again, Lori. It's always
Thanks.
fascinating.
Good to talk to you, Paul.
And that is another roundup of news from Indian Country. On this edition of the Native News Update, we want to thank you for joining by saying when and